Welcome back to another episode of the Everything About Nothing podcast show. My name is Aaron. Here on this week's episode, we have a good friend, buddy of mine, and one of the best Dallas lawyers I could think of, Preston Osborn. How you doing tonight?
Doing pretty well. How are you tonight, Aaron?
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm so happy that you are doing this with me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, let's have some fun.
Man, introduce yourself. How did you become a lawyer? Tell us what it takes. Get us to where you're at now.
Sure. So name's Preston. I'm a Dallas native, born and raised here. I went to SMU for undergrad and for law school. I'm a rare double Mustang. We do exist. There's a few of us. And so I'm sitting here at SMU junior year trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. I've already switched majors a couple times. Started out in the arts and went into business and decided that let's do the law school route and see if that works out. Of course, this is in the middle of the wonderful Great Recession that us millennials had the joy of going through. So it made sense as well to delay entering the job force for a few years. But also I argue with people all the time, so it just made sense to argue for a living. Why not? So go to law school, get into it, and honestly, I started out wanting to be a securities transactions lawyer, very business oriented, the paper side of things. Didn't think I'd ever be in the courtroom, and coming up on the summer before my last year of law school, and I've got to start talking about getting the first job lined up. Let's get the career on the move. So I put the call out to every friend of the family that we knew, anyone who was a lawyer, just to say, hey, what do you do? Do you know anybody? How can I get just a basic internship? So I sit down with a guy, went to school with his daughter. We grew up, I think, our first class together was in pre-kindergarten. So really knew him for a long time. And he was a trial attorney. And at this point, I'm coming into my third year of 3 at law school. I'd never taken a trial practice course or anything in particular that would gear me up for it. And he sits me down over breakfast, and we're talking. He's like, just come out for a couple weeks, maybe a month, try it out, see if you like it. We'll do a little internship, throw you a few bucks an hour. And got in there, and man, I loved the civil trial practice side of things. It was definitely up my alley. I took right to it. So my 4-week-ish internship turned into a 5-year stint at this law firm. I stayed through for the last year of my school career, and they were generous enough to keep me on and fund my bar prep and kept me through that. Was fortunate enough to pass the bar the first time around, and stuck around. We had a few really big trials, really big cases in the middle of there that really helped me when I actually sat for the bar. I was like, oh yeah, this question about evidence. Well, I just had a question just like that in front of a judge 3 months ago. Let's answer this one. So it worked out pretty well.
So where you're at now?
So the firm I started out with, they were an insurance defense civil litigation law firm. So not criminal, it's civil, and they were on the preferred list of law firms for insurance carriers. That was where I started out. Great place to cut your teeth on. You get a lot of the same type of cases, a lot of the same type of issues. So it's really good to kind of figure out how everything works. So this firm that I'm at now, their clients are more diverse. They do have some insurance-based cases, but it's not their primary focus. I think, most of the law firms that I've interacted with at least have some insurance-based clients, but there's a broad range. But this firm I'm at now, they are more federal-type cases, the bigger interstate, multi-party, a lot more complex type of cases, and their clients, most of our clients are intermodal international shippers. So something comes in from Europe by sea, gets put on a truck, gets shipped across the country, gets put on a train. You name it, things happen, lawsuits happen. So it's different and also the same. It's still civil, not criminal, and it's still lawsuits, not putting deals together. Those are the 2 to 4 different ways that the law is broken down.
Yeah, so, I mean, you've been doing this 6-7 years now. For those, some people may know, but those who don't, you spend a lot more time prepping, learning, going to school. What's that process like? I mean, some people know that the bar exam is out there, but for your experience, what did you go through? For somebody who's not a lawyer, what does that process look like for you?
Sure, and so it began really. So I took a undergraduate course. It was a political science. It wasn't a major, but it was in the political science department, and it was the history of the Supreme Court. And it was the closest I got to an actual law school class before I got to law school. And I got the lowest grade of my undergraduate career.
Really?
Yeah. I got a solid D. But I'll tell you what, I learned more from that class than I did from any other class. I go back to my notes on that sometimes. That professor is rock solid as well. Joe Kabilka, he still teaches at SMU. He is a rock star. And he will kick your butt if you take his class. But you will learn everything he teaches. And so that was where it all began. I was like, man, is that really what I want to do for the rest of my career? And I did. Law school is a constant battle with your own sanity and your own limits. Lawyers will, if you talk to a lawyer and say, should I go to law school? They will say no. They'll try to talk you out of it. They'll say all the things they can possibly think of to get you not to do it, because only someone who will disregard that advice and still go to law school is the kind of person who's going to get through it. Because it really sucks. Law school is the worst.
And expensive.
And it's expensive to boot. You're not out there. You can't go. You can't work. I had the very terrible misfortune of having to pay my way through law school. I was waiting tables at Olive Garden through it. And I don't know how the hell I got through it, because even if I wasn't doing that, I still wouldn't have had time to do it. It is brutal. It is a lot of time. And honestly, there's not enough waking hours in the day for you to study everything they assign you. But all that aside, there is a point in law school when it does kind of click. You now think like a lawyer. And I will say you think pretty cynically about the world. You think, what's the worst case? Let's go with that. And once you get past that point, things do become easier, and you get experience, and now you know things, and it's much better.
Yeah, so do you think that at that moment when it clicks for you, like, is that the first true passionate moment you had? Like, you knew this is what I want to do, or was it before that?
I would say that certainly was the first time for me in my whole grand scheme of trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, I had several different majors that I tried out in college as an undergraduate. I was going to be a film director. I was going to be an advertising major, which is more artistic than business oriented. And yeah, I tried a few things out, and I ended up being an accountant major because that was the most practical one. But I never had that aha click moment as an accountant. It was just, I can physically do it. It will make me money. So the first time in my career hunt, finding what I was passionate about, came in my second year of law school after a particularly brutal scathing by a professor. And I went back and hit the books, and I thought I had everything figured out before I went into class, and I thought I had the cases all read up, and I knew what I was talking about, and I stood up and answered his questions, and he made me look like an idiot, because frankly I was. Right. But then I went back and hit the books again based on his feedback, and went, oh, that's the way I should have thought about it. And it wasn't that I suddenly knew everything about being a lawyer, but I got that your first impression isn't necessarily the best one, and you got to really, think through it twice, 3 times, 4 times, whatever. But it did finally click that this is kind of the way that lawyers think. There's not necessarily one right answer, and I loved that. And that, yeah, you're right. That was that was the moment. It was during my second year of law school in my contracts class, when I got called out and made look like a fool, and went home and studied the books again. I said, this is the profession for me.
Do you find a similarity in your attributes, your characteristics with other lawyers, or is it just a personal drive for them?
So, in terms of the lawyer population in general, we have a very, very, very broad scope of personalities and skill sets and types of people. I mean, anybody can be a lawyer. There's no inhibiting factor. You have a certain intelligence level, you have a certain skin color, you have a certain background. There's all sorts of people who are able to become lawyers and excel and find their client base and do incredibly well. To boil the lawyer down to one specific personality trait is difficult, but I will say, in my experience in the Dallas area, in working with civil focused attorneys, criminal is a totally different breed. I will say that.
Sure.
The few that I've had the privilege of interacting with, they look at things a little bit differently than I do. Their practice is very different than mine. But as far as my Dallas-based civil attorneys that I'm talking about, there's a lot of cynicism. There's a lot of you have to be a little bit jaded to deal with the kind of cases we deal with, because you have good and bad clients. You have clients that walk in the door and you will rip your left arm off to help them out. And you have clients who walk in the door and you don't want to see them again. But it's not up to you. The partner says, this is our client, we're going to help them out. And your obligation is to do everything you possibly can to give them the best possible service you can. And so you have to be a little bit one step removed at times.
Like emotionally, or what?
You have to be a little...
You can't be attached.
You have to be able to detach. Sometimes you have to also recognize when it's the right time to become emotionally attached, because you can make a really good argument if you're invested in it emotionally. That it's a rare occasion, though, when I've come into that.
Right.
But I will say most of the lawyers that I deal with, I mean, you do have to have that ability to be able to defend someone, passionately argue for someone who you fundamentally disagree with what they're doing, what they're trying to accomplish, their viewpoint in the world. There are plenty of clients represented where I don't want to go hang out with them after work. I don't want to see them again, but I will do my damnedest to give them a good representation and to argue as hard as I can for them in court. And I'll spend nights, I will spend evenings laying in bed thinking about how I'm going to give Aaron Kozak, the podcast producer. I hate podcasts. Podcasts are the worst. But you know what? He's getting screwed over by his podcast producer, and I will sit there and I'll do everything I can to defend this man and give him a level footing, because that's what I'm here for. And at the end of the day, I do still appreciate being able to do that for every client that I possibly can. And I do think, to answer your question, that it's a fundamental trait that you do have to be able to have in the legal world. Honestly, with any client, you need to be able to, even if you don't agree with their motivations, what they're trying to do, even their strategy sometimes, you might think this is a stupid strategy, but they're saying they want to pursue it. You got to be able to put that behind you. And that's, I would say, the number one ability to do. If you can't do that, you're going to have a really tough time as a lawyer.
It's very clear that you're very passionate and you enjoy what you do. So what early career choices have you made that led you to where you are now?
As I mentioned a little bit earlier, I entered the legal profession during the recession. We were kind of coming out of it. I graduated in 2011, and things were definitely getting better, but the job market was rough still. So I entered law school with that knowledge that it's a dog-eat-dog world out there. It's tough. You gotta scrap and find a good place to be. And so I had the mentality of, well, I will put feelers out. I will see what's out there. I will I wouldn't even hit up my family and friends to ask them for jobs. It was literally, who do I know who's in this realm? I would ask them to breakfast, ask them just to talk. And I didn't say, can you hire me? I said, what do you do? How would someone like me get into that field? And when you pose a question like that, opportunities do open up. So I asked that for a couple different people, and some people said, well, you have to have a certain minimum GPA. Our firm doesn't hire anyone who's not in the top 10%. And some people said, well, we're not hiring at all. Some people said, like the job I ended up at, for example, he said, well, come out. It's a low stakes gig. Come out for 4 weeks, and if you suck, then that's it. And if you love it, then you stick around. And I happen to. It is a matter of putting feelers out and just trying things out and seeing what you like. I had 2 other externships while I was in law school. The externship, as opposed to the internships, you get school credit for it. So I had 2 externships. One was with an oil and gas company. I wouldn't say company. But they weren't brokers. They put together deals. So they worked with a broker who was outside of them. They were 2 attorneys, and they did all the due diligence. They did all the, I should say, the documents the SEC requires that you provide to investors. There's a lot of like legal stuff you got to put in. There's a risk of there not being oil there. There's a risk of environmental disasters. There's a risk of workers getting injured in the site shutdown. You name it. So there's all the like legal aspects to putting an oil deal together. So this firm handled that. Mm-hmm. And they had a separate group they worked with that handled the money. So that was one of my little externships. I tried being an oil deal broker, if you will. And it was fascinating, but they weren't hiring, and there wasn't really any prospects there. So I moved along. I had an externship. I was part of a pretty awesome class that SMU has. It's called the Corporate Counsel Externship Program. You got to apply to it. It's very competitive. Once you're accepted, they have partnerships with companies all over Dallas. AT&T is one. Let's see, Exxon's down in Austin, so Exxon isn't one. But a lot of like big companies in the Dallas area, and they'll place the students in the general counsel's department of various businesses in the Dallas area. So that was a pretty cool class to take. I was placed at the nonprofit MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving.
Yeah.
Tried that out. The nonprofit legal world it's wild. It's totally different.
In what ways?
Well, so MAD is a very aggressive nonprofit. I'm hesitant to say too much about their particular strategy because I don't want to give any of their secrets away, but they're aggressive on multiple fronts. And that was an interesting thing for me to see from the nonprofit side, especially coming from a family where my mother and father both work in the church, very large churches in Dallas. So I've seen the way that other nonprofits work, and it was interesting to see the way that nonprofit was very aggressive to lobby and use the legal system. I realized that both nonprofits and the political legal overlap side of the law was not for me. So I bailed on that pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Not my cup of tea.
Yeah, that's crazy. You mentioned during your time you were kind of looking for advice or talking to people and trying to find jobs or just find ways to learn more about becoming a lawyer. So during that time, did you receive any specific advice that stuck with you, or did you develop a mentor that was able to give you advice, throughout your career so far?
I did have one amazing mentor that I stumbled into, and it was one of those things where you kind of look back and go, how on earth did that happen? So while I was at SMU, I keep coming back to my undergrad years. It was that junior year when I was deciding that I was going to become a lawyer. It was formulating, it was solidifying. I was trying other majors out, they were working out, and I was getting pretty far along in my accountant major. That was what I had declared. But I knew I didn't want to be an accountant. It was not for me. So my junior year of undergrad, I knew I was probably going to end up going down that law school career. Well, my oldest cousin got married, and he is a Mississippi native. He got married to a South Carolina girl, and they got married in Charleston. And so I flew out there for the wedding, and we're at the rehearsal dinner, and it was this huge blowout. It was the most beautiful wedding I've been to. I mean, like tens of thousands of dollars were spent. It was gorgeous. You had pigs roasting on spits. You had huge cakes. I mean, I couldn't believe where I was. And so I'm in this fairyland, if you will, and I'm telling all of my family, my uncles, I'm going to law school. I'm going to go down this path. This is what I want to do. This is where I'm thinking I'm going. And my uncle, who's the father of the groom, Uncle Willis, says, "Oh, Preston, you want to go to law school? Well, hey, right over here is the general counsel for SMU."
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I did not
He is
know
the
this story.
godfather of the groom. He's his godfather. And we get introduced at that time. His name's Paul Ward. He's still the general counsel for SMU. He's an amazing man. And so we got introduced at this wedding. And it was just a simple, hey, here's my nephew Preston. He wants to be a lawyer. He's at SMU. And Paul said, all right, come on over. Be our undergraduate clerk, if you will.
Is that... Okay, I am by no means anywhere near being a lawyer, studied law, anything. Paul Ward. Is that Paul Ward in the Office of Legal Affairs at SMU?
Yes.
Okay, you and I have shared this story together, but I forgot his last name. I didn't remember. So my first summer job, the first summer I ever stayed here, I was raised in Florida, so I was going to SMU in Texas here. The first summer job that I had was the same job you had in the Office of Legal Affairs.
Mm-hmm.
But Paul did not hire me, and I was honestly definitely afraid of Paul working there because this man was super nice. Don't get me wrong. Super nice guy, but just straight face. Didn't talk to him, or at least as a clerk or whatever. I say I was you described it as a clerk, but you probably did more work than I did. But I was a paper pusher really in the office. But I collected the mail and answered the phones and transferred phone lines. But Paul, it's like you didn't talk to him unless you had a piece of mail with his name on it, or it was legitimate, or he was passing you in the hallway and you would just say hi and
To the point.
to the point.
Yes.
Same Paul Ward.
Same Paul Ward.
Oh my god.
With the embroidered cuffs. He had his initials on his cuffs.
I didn't notice that about him. But...
He is a meticulous man. Excellent lawyer. So he this was when the Bush Library at SMU was being developed and planned. So I mean, we were in there. We're talking about making sure that all the property rights are in line. There's not some lingering person out there who's going to show up at the last minute and say, "Oh, I own this one sliver of land. Give me $1 billion." Or there's no library. I mean, so there's all the property rights issues. There's all the zoning issues. I mean, Highland Park, is one of the most absurdly red tape oriented governments in Texas. It's ridiculous. They get involved in things just for the sake of it because they like to feel powerful. So we're over here making sure they're happy, and Paul Ward he got it done. He got it through. I mean, it was all completed on time and I think under budget as far as I know, and the Bushes were very happy. So that was when I was there. So to answer your question, Paul Ward was my mentor during my time when I was deciding if I wanted to become a lawyer and getting me through it. And my internship, I forget exactly which phrase they used while I was there, but my time working at the Office of Legal Affairs at SMU, I learned a lot. I saw a lot. I saw what it really meant to be a general counsel of a very, very large corporation, because they have a lot of money going through that corporation.
Yeah, I mean, they have grants, they have donors. I mean, just everything imaginable going through that school. I personally would think that, yes, if you were somebody who was into studying law and becoming a lawyer, that job probably benefited you to the ends with, but like for me, it was a summer job. They offer, this is hilarious. They offered a 401k and I had no idea. I worked in that department for a year as just as a student. To me, it was a student job.
Sure.
And I worked there for a whole year, and I think at that point, I don't remember what year that was. Well, it was it was the summer into my senior year, so my last year of college, and then I worked there for the year, my senior year. But it wasn't probably till like 2 years after I graduated. I got another job, had my first 401k, and I'm like looking online, and they're like, "Oh, you got a 401k from SMU?" I'm like, where did that come from? And then I realized like they hired me on over the summer as not a student, but as like an SME employee, which I thought was, I had no idea, but
yeah,
it could be totally beneficial for somebody that is going into into law.
Sure. And I think certainly if you are in college and you are thinking about getting into law school and you're not sure if it's for you, just go talk to your Office of Legal Affairs. If you walk in and you're not waving a gun, they're going to talk to you, and they're happy to see someone who isn't trying to sue the university. Because honestly, every day, we had a button under the desk, right? So honestly, every day there was one person who'd walk in, and they wanted to sue somebody at the university, and they wanted us to deal with it right then. And we're like, sir, ma'am, we don't, like, we're not here to represent this one student who got in a bar fight with you. We represent the university. Please go away. And they get angry and you have to push the button and they get dragged off. So there's that whole side of things. That happens all the time. Our random walk-ins were few and far between. It was always welcoming to get a student who'd walk in and say, "Oh, hey, what do you guys do? What's the deal here?" We were always more than happy to walk a student around and like show them what we're doing, show them what's cooking legally that we could disclose, at least generically. So yeah, if you're thinking about going to law school and you're in college, you might as well apply. It can't hurt to
or
be
at least
there.
Go ask.
Yeah,
if they have
go ask.
A position.
They could always use the work, and they're always happy to help. And every single attorney that I talked to in the Office of Legal Affairs at SMU, they were so willing to give me advice. Each and every one of them cared for no reason at all. They saw a young, up-and-coming, potentially wanted to be attorney, and they're happy to give advice. And honestly, I will say most attorneys that I've dealt with, when we have a clerk or an intern, every firm I've been at has them. You want to give them information. It is in an attorney's nature to give unsolicited advice. We do it every day. So we're more than happy to just talk to you. So get in there and just ask and talk. And I think you'll get somewhere.
What do you think was the biggest risk you've taken so far?
Undoubtedly, the biggest risk is a financial one. It is difficult to explain the financial burden that one has to undertake to get your law degree. I mean, it is the same with the medical profession. In fact, it might be more with the medical profession. But you're going to end up taking on a lot more debt than you probably realize. So I had everything very well budgeted out. Here's what I'm going to pay for rent. Here's what I'm going to do for work. Like I mentioned, I was waiting tables at Olive Garden, which was just the worst. And you can budget as best you can, but you don't realize once you get in there, it sucks everything up. So you have no time or energy left to spend making a dime. So you're going to take out as much as you can on loans. And if you are blessed to have family and friends that can support you, do it. I mean, don't feel ashamed to take on assistance from others as much as you possibly can, because those interest rates are brutal and those loans don't get forgiven. In fact, those loans are looked on less favorably than undergraduate loans. So even now when I look at the public discourse and some on the far left are talking about forgiving student loans and such, I'm still screwed for the most part because they're graduate loans, and I apparently now, when I was 20, 21, when I took them out, was way wiser than just a few years ago when I took them out as an undergraduate. But that is what it is. I mean, I certainly would agree that I need to pay them back, and I signed on to do so. You asked what the biggest risk was, and it is definitely a financial risk because I am now on the hook for a beautiful house that I cannot live in because it doesn't actually exist. I have a home's worth of loans sitting out there that'll not be discharged until I pay them off. But it's important to say that, and also in the same breath say the career path for a lawyer is different than other professions, especially if you're on the plaintiff side of the lawsuit. So which I'm not, but I work with them every day. So on the plaintiff side, you get a lot of cases, right? It's almost like gambling, except you can assess the odds before you start and decide what you want to roll the dice on. So with the plaintiff side of things, you're kind of at the mercy of what walks in the door for the most part, but you might get someone who walks in the door who you're able to defend very well and get them all the money that justice deserves, and then you get your cut, 30-40%, and boom, law school is paid for. Just like that.
Yeah,
just like that.
I don't want to compare it to like real estate, but you hit that one big house. I mean, like, I guess real estate, you don't have like a lot of debt to get licensed or whatever, but it's that drive, the same drive of like if I sell $1 million home or I have $1 million lawsuit, you're gonna get that. I guess me personally, I would call it commission, if you will.
Sure.
Your cut of it.
Same type of compensation. Yeah.
Right. So that alone kind of makes it worthwhile.
Yeah.
Assuming you build your clientele, you're working for a good firm, but that takes years. You're just now getting to a really good point, I feel like, and you could start really seeing it pay off for yourself.
Yeah. So the reason that I have that mentality of it is my first boss that I worked for. He told me he named his vacation homes based on the case.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
that's so funny.
He has 4 vacation homes: one in Florida, one in South Texas, one in Colorado, and one on the West Coast. And each one has a name, and it's tied to a case.
Must be nice.
Yeah, I have not had the privilege of having any of those cases yet. You do. I mean, to be fair, you have to either be a solo attorney to reap those rewards, or you're at a firm with a very good compensation system. So, I mean, all those are things to think of when you join a firm. You got to talk to them about it. And both of the 2 firms I've worked at now have had a very generous system to where if you bring in a case, you get a certain percentage on top of whatever the firm would normally get. So, like, I would get paid for doing the work on the case, and also at the end of the day, let's say the firm takes home 30% of the verdict. Well, out of that 30%, maybe I would get half, let's say. So it's a good thing to talk about whenever you join a firm is what's the compensation for if I bring in a client. But to be fair, though, if you're in your first 5 years, you're probably not bringing in clients, so it probably doesn't matter. Right. It's once you get to that senior associate, junior partner status where that starts to become important, and you start to be able to make those nice lump payments on your student loans. That's kind of the end goal, right? Is you hit it big a couple times and it's taken care of. But until you hit one of those, like I haven't hit one yet, for example, and I mean, it's stressful, right? I mean, the loans are still out there, and you gotta think about it. Sure.
So I wasn't going to ask this question, but it naturally got brought up here. But for an entry level lawyer, let's say you're at your first firm, you're just out of college, you're working, the kind of low end cases that they just hand you and you deal with it. What's a year's worth, ballpark, Dallas-Fort Worth area salary, maybe a little compensation once a year, like a little bonus or something. What's somebody looking at potentially?
And I will say it depends on a lot of things. That is the most lawyer answer you'll ever hear. Every lawyer will say it depends. It depends on your firm's compensation structure. So the first firm I was at had a lower base, but a much higher hourly compensation. So if I hit my minimum hours at my old firm, then every hour after that I would hit, I would get a nice rate. It was pretty good. At my firm right now, I don't do that. It is just a straight salary, and I get my salary, and if I make the minimums, then we're good to go, which is for me kind of weird, but we're working with it. I will say though, if you're in civil litigation in Dallas and you're making less than $75,000, then unless you're not working very hard, then you're probably being underpaid.
Sure.
And if you're making less than $100,000 and you're working very hard, then you're probably being underpaid.
Right. Yeah, that's good information. I think people should know. I mean, why work at one place if you're getting 15 when you could work at basically the same job in another place for $17 an hour or whatever.
Well, of course, and if you're at one of those law firms that charges a higher hourly rate, then you should be applying that to increase the numbers I just said, because it goes up pretty fast once those hourly rates go up pretty fast. So
sure.
I've worked at two firms that have middle to lower hourly rates, $200 to $300 per hour, which is on the lower end. So if you're above that, billing out at a firm, and you as an associate are making less than what I was saying, then yeah, you might need to just talk to the partners about what you're getting paid.
We've talked a little bit about general knowledge, what it takes, all that kind of stuff. We want to get down to the really juicy stuff now. If there's any sort of I'm going to ask it with a question and preference that you can provide your answer with a good in-person experience, a life experience. What's a typical day at work for you? And there's kind of a double question too. What's a typical day of work for a lawyer, as well as how often do you go to court? How often are you in a courtroom? Kind of combine that. If you were going to go to a courtroom, what's that day like? But also, how often do you go?
Sure. So I have worked for two different types of firms, even in the same realm for the most part. So I have both worked for a boss who wants to just do the court stuff, and the associates handle all the paper stuff, which means I got almost no court time. And I've also worked for a boss who, unless it's trial, wants you to handle it. So I prefer unless it's trial, you handle it, because I get to do everything, right?
Yeah.
It's great. And it really does depend. And that's a question that you should ask in your interview is, how much courtroom time can I expect versus deposition time versus just sitting in a back office doing research, because no one wants to do that. It's very important that you ask in the interview the typical associate how much of these categories of time do they get. So it's varied a little bit between my two positions, but it's, for the most part, I'm in the courtroom twice a month. Sometimes I'll go 2 months without stepping foot in the courtroom. Sometimes I'm there every day for 3 weeks. So, but I'll say on average, it's at least 2 days, maybe 3 days a month. I'm in the courtroom. It's definitely less now from what I've heard from the old timers than it used to be. It used to be, and they're twice a week, but so much is done electronically now. You just don't need to get in there and talk to the judge. It can just be done. So aside from being in the courtroom arguing in front of a judge, depositions are a huge part of litigation. Every single witness, for the most part, gets deposed before you get anywhere near trial in the civil world. In the criminal world, that's not quite the case. Yes, I mean, depositions, I'll do 4 depositions a month. Easy. It's pretty common. A lot of times, you end up just sitting there and someone else is taking the deposition. You sit there and do other work, and hey, I can bill for that too. That's nice. When you're not doing time in the courtroom or time at a deposition, you are in your office, making sure you haven't missed any deadlines, and pushing paper around for the most part. Expert deadlines. You got to make sure this expert's seen this medical record. You got to make sure you've asked the right questions to the plaintiff to ensure that if you missed something down the line, well, it wasn't because you didn't ask, it was because they didn't give it to you. So, I would say 90 to 95% of the time is in the office, doing the same type of stuff every single day that you've done a million times on every other case, making sure you didn't miss something. And then the 5% to 10% is the fun stuff where you're in a deposition, you're arguing to a judge, or, you're in a trial. Oh, how nice. That never happens anymore.
Yeah, I mean, to think about that, I think a lot of people maybe base their opinions or their views of lawyers, most commonly off of movies or television shows where all you see is what's in the courtroom, right? And if I was an aspiring lawyer, that's what I would think. I would think that's what I'm going to do every day. I'm going to be in a courtroom every day, arguing a case, but really it's the opposite, like you said, 95% of the work is done, especially now with technology too. Not that amount of time is all done behind the scenes, not face to face in a court. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but my assumption would probably be maybe if it was like criminal or something like that, that maybe that face to face interaction maybe happens more often.
Well, yeah, and I only have a very limited experience in the criminal world. From in law school, they encourage you to go down to the courtroom and watch it happen, and watch a criminal trial, watch arraignment, all that stuff. And I mean, there are even some TV shows that aren't too totally off the mark. For example, The Good Wife. They've got some that they do streamline it for television, but procedurally, generally, it's close enough. You can get a feel for it. Law and Order, of course, they have criminal attorneys on staff that help with the script. Law and Order is very accurate, even though it also is sped up a lot. I can say it's definitely the more interesting area of law, and things do move along more quickly there. And you do have a lot more FaceTime, flying by the seat of your pants type of stuff. You got a witness on the stand, you haven't talked to him before. We're just exploring it right now in front of the jury. That happens every day in the criminal world, and I will say it almost never happens on the civil side. In fact, when someone says something on the stand in a civil trial that hasn't already been said in a deposition, you can guarantee the other guy is going to throw his hands up and say, "Judge, it's an unfair surprise." And there are not very many surprises in the civil side of things compared to the criminal side, for sure.
Without stating names or legal attributions that you can or cannot share, what's been your favorite case that you've ever worked?
So my favorite case that I've worked is the one that I colloquially call the kickback thieves case. And I think I might have mentioned this to you before. It's a case that I started on at my old firm, and I didn't get to trial with it before I switched firms, but I still follow it just based on the public filings because it's so interesting to me. So it is a case of as I call them, a family of thieves, and that's kind of what I've seen is when you get really sophisticated, not even really sophisticated, but anything more than just a guy who's found an exploit. When you get like systematic exploits of a company or of a system or a government agency, family seems to get looped in because they know they can trust those people, and you can't break off family, right? They're there, so you've got a hold over them. So my juiciest case, the one that I appreciated the most, was the kickback thieves. So it was a group of family members who were running and I got to keep it vague because I can't make it to where anything I say can be identified and used, because it's an ongoing case. It hasn't gone to trial yet. But I can say there's a group of thieves, and they're all related, and they had someone who is very high up in the accounting system in their branch after their company was acquired, and they were able to kind of manipulate so we have this legacy system. This is how we set it up. Oh, now we're integrating. So while they did that, they were able to, just from the outset, carve out for themselves a nice little back channel to funnel money through. And it started the moment they were acquired, and it was ongoing until the moment they were caught and all got canned. So it was interesting to me because I have that accounting background that I've mentioned, and I, as the associate, was tasked with learning how to be a forensic accountant. Granted, we had a forensic accountant that we had hired to consult with, so I had a very, very smart person to ask questions to who could tell me how to do all this. So I had a teacher. I wasn't just learning this in a void.
And that person was on your side?
Yes. We had okay. So you're able to, in the legal world, hire consulting experts, and you can hire as many consulting experts as you want to, and unless you decide that you want to use them at trial, the other side never knows about them.
Sure.
I mean, and it makes sense, right? Because a lawyer's not supposed to know everything, so a lawyer should be able to go out there and just ask a question to an expert without that, just the mere fact that they ask, like, well, what is this? It could, if you ask the wrong question from the get-go, the other side could hear about it, and it tanks your whole case. So there's protections in the legal world for if you're just out there exploring, just trying to figure out how this works. You can do that without the fear of, well, oh shoot, if I ask a stupid question and I phrase it the wrong way, is that going to get twisted against me, as lawyers love to do, and I ruin the case. So I'm out there, I'm talking to a forensic accountant, and I, just on my basic degree, I can add and subtract, I can follow the money. There's an art to it, but it's not the trickiest thing. And I'm talking with this accountant, and they are at a whole other level than me. They're like, well, you see that this money got transferred to this account, and then on this date it got put into this account. But did you also notice that, like, this other account got opened over here, and there was an interest rate difference? Like, all this, like, ridiculous stuff that I didn't understand at all, and I still don't understand. And so he said, did you see all this? And I said, no. Also, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So he's over here, like, I'm uncovering just the money being moved, and he's, like, putting it all together. And it was the most fun I've had for a while, because I spent 2 weeks with this guy, just basically like Ben Affleck and the accountant, like drawing squigglies on a whiteboard, tracing money around. And, we unraveled years of, it wasn't even a particularly smart scheme. It was just they were moving it so much around and shuffling it so fast, and they were in charge of approving stuff that they were able to pull the wool over the eyes of the people who were actually watching it. And I had so much fun with that. And I probably won't have a case like that again in my career because it was so time intensive. But it was fun being there, working with, like, neck and neck with an expert in their field, uncovering stuff with them, busting these people who were they were so dirty. Yeah. Everything they did was dirty. And then when I met them, they were just even dirtier. I mean, just like through and through, they were just bad people. And so that was one of the few cases where I really felt like I was exacting justice on the world by uncovering all the dirt they'd buried. And I have no idea how it's going to turn out because, as I said, I left the firm before it went to trial, and last I heard, it hadn't gone to trial. And it doesn't surprise me because there's going to be a lot of paper to get in order to prove years and years and years and years of very sophisticated embezzling. Well, relatively sophisticated embezzling.
Yeah.
Like, an accountant uncovered it pretty quick, but they hid it for a long time, so there's a lot to sift through. But yeah, that was the kickback thieves case.
So it's still an active case, and you're following it to this day.
Yeah, and once it goes to trial and gets a verdict and it's all set in stone, I'll be happy to give more details that I haven't been able to give yet.
Well, we'll have you back for an episode too, so just so we can talk about
Excellent.
that favorite case. But is there any sort of websites, organizations, people, magazines, anything that you would suggest that you follow that have helped you, or maybe something that you might suggest to people who want to be a lawyer? They say, hey, follow this blog or something that could just give overall advice, something that they could follow every day.
Yeah, there's a fun website, Above the Law is what it's called, and it's blog format as far as I recall. Yeah, they do posts and articles from time to time, and so they're both a newspaper, but also they have like blog posts, so they cover interesting stuff that's happening in the legal profession. Their most recent one that I saw, so my younger brother is currently at Baylor as a lawyer. He is rolling into his third year of law school. And Above the Law was covering the fact that Baylor Law School wasn't really easing any restrictions in light of the coronavirus. Like, they were making the students take classes remotely, but they were mandating letter grades and stuff, and they weren't really relaxing the finals requirements. Last I talked to my brother, I think things were getting a little better, but Above the Law was covering the controversy at the time, and Baylor Law School was the last one that hadn't really done anything to help out their students at all. For some reason, they were just being real hard asses about it, and there was no reason for it. So this blog took up the students' stance and wrote a very passionate and I think well-written article about it. But it's a great blog, news source to follow if you want to get a pulse on what's going on in America in the legal world. They cover the big Supreme Court cases. They cover, say the president or the Congress does something unprecedented. They'll write about it, but they'll also say what that actually means. They'll put it in context, which is hard to find nowadays. Every news source will say what happened, but it's rare to find one that says what that means in a non-political way. And it's really hard to do nowadays. And I think that's a good news source for that.
Yeah, that's good to hear. There's a lot of just speculations of, fake news sources and,
sure,
fake knowledge. And especially based around this podcast, we try to get people who are in the industry of the topic for the week. But, unless you live it, you don't know the exact pure understanding and answer that people are seeking or trying to look for, right? So it's, you can Google stuff all day long and it just, you'll find a website, an internet source of blah, so, that's, I'd like to ask that question if I can to guest on the show, because I think there's still a lot of good sources out there that really can give you a true understanding of what it takes and everything you need to learn and all that kind of stuff. So,
well, and I certainly think a great question to always ask your guests is, so you, an industry insider, where do you find your knowledge about your own industry?
Yeah.
That's a great question to ask. And, I wouldn't even know. So you're in the entertainment industry, events industry. I wouldn't know where to even begin to look to find the pulse on which events, from a national standpoint, which large-scale conventions and events are going forward, and how's the supply chain being disrupted, the labor force. I wouldn't know where to start with that. So if our roles are reversed and I was the podcast host asking you, my guest, what do you do? That's a great question to ask, is where do you find your news about your own job?
Yeah, I don't think people do enough research just to have an open understanding, or like an open... like the trends change, so I think there's no open understanding of, even no matter what career you're in, that there's a trend to how you maybe approach a case, or how you produce events, or how you whatever, cook a food, or there's trends to every career, and if you spend a little time trying to look into that, you obviously can learn something. Like you said earlier, old dog lawyers used to face a judge 3 to 4 times a week, and you're talking about facing a judge 3 to 4 times a month now. So the trend of technology is changing all that stuff. So like you said, I definitely like to ask that question, because just think of a lawyer 10 years from now, or somebody who becomes a lawyer or is just starting law school now. The trends have probably changed ever since you started law school 6-7 years ago. So it's definitely it's interesting to hear. So we're almost out of time, but I want to ask one more question for you. Any advice that you could give to anyone who'd want to be a lawyer, who's currently in law school, or even who is a lawyer?
So as an undergraduate, I was always miffed that I would have to go do these unpaid internships. I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm here. Pay me. Like, you shouldn't be profiting off of my labor, right? I'm here contributing. But in hindsight, I will say you don't have to really spend a whole lot of time being an unpaid intern or an extern for class credit, which, come on, is an unpaid intern, right? So you don't have to spend a whole lot of time doing that. Maybe like 3, 4, up to 6 weeks, like that kind of time range, right? Only doing maybe 10 to 20 hours a week. 20 would be definitely pushing it. Like 10 is probably plenty. You gotta get in there. You gotta get your foot in the door. The best thing you can do, though, is just get your face in front of practicing lawyers if you want to get into the industry. Because once you've gotten your face in front of them, all you got to do then is just talk to them. Like, if you're only there 5 hours a week paid, you're there. You are allowed to be there. You have access. You can talk to them freely. So you talk to them in the break room. You talk to them in the hall. You pop into their office and say, hey, Aaron, you're a seasoned attorney. You've had cases like this. What's the deal with this? Why did we dump this client? Or why did we decide that this expert witness that we'd spent tens or hundreds of hours preparing for a trial, preparing for a position, why did we suddenly decide that this expert witness, for example, is just worthless? We're not going to bring him to trial. Like, fundamental questions. And if you're there and you are interested and curious and you're eager, then any lawyer who is just a halfway decent person is going to look at you and they're going to want to educate you, help you, do what they can. And they might not offer you a job or a position, but they'll offer you at the very minimum, and they might, because that's what happened to me. They did offer me a job, but they might not, and they probably won't. But they will at the very least offer you some really good advice and say, well, hey, so you look at things this way and that's wrong. Or you're so focused on this expert being the best, let's just say, biologist in the world, but you're forgetting the fact that this expert is unable to just talk to a person. Like, you sit them down and you can barely hold a conversation. Have you tried taking them out to coffee? Exactly. Imagine putting them in front of a jury. The practical advice like that. So my advice is do whatever you can to just get yourself in the room regularly with a practicing attorney who has preferably one who owns the firm that you're at. But even if they're a partner there, someone who's been around the block a few times. Because if anyone has been in the industry for decades, they're going to know people. If they like you, they can, at the very least, get you an introduction. And at that point, it's on you to make a good impression and build a bond, make a friendship. I mean, simply being there doesn't entitle you to anything. It's always on you to turn an opportunity into something more.
So it's really experience and knowledge. Like, what your advice is getting the experience and getting the knowledge to better yourself.
Certainly. And the practical side of it is just as important, if not more important, than the academic side of it. I mean, I'd say it's equal because you have to both know the law and know how to actually apply it. So yes, getting out there, getting that experience, getting the face time with people who are doing it every day, you got to get out there. I mean, it's on you to go and find even the thinnest connection you have. Maybe it's your, I don't know, uncle's old roommate is a lawyer. Just take him out to lunch and don't say, hey, uncle's roommate, I want a job. Say, hey, uncle's roommate, I want to be an attorney. What do you think I should do? Like, what's the next step? I want to get a job. And if he doesn't have something, or she, or whatever, they might have a friend who's hiring. That's the path that you got to go down if you want to get into this profession. Because I will say the legal community is one where it still is more about, or equally about, who you know. More than, I mean, if you go to Yale Law School and get an A, it doesn't matter who you know. You went to Yale, right? So it's what you know. But unless you go to Yale Law School and get an A, who you know is so important. Building out that network, finding someone who's 1 or 2 degrees separated, finding that common ground, and just casually developing it. That's how you, in my experience, get your career off the ground from 0 to at least 1.
Man, I really appreciate it. I definitely learned quite a few things tonight, and I'm so glad we got to record this. You've been a really good friend ever since your undergraduate, and I'm super excited. I just can't thank you enough, man.
Next time let's talk soccer or 3D printing or whatever else I got going on.
Yeah, you're a man of many tricks, but we'll definitely. I'm sure the viewers would love to hear more about you and have you on for another episode. So we want to thank you for joining in tonight, this week, and this is again the Everything About Nothing podcast show. I'm your host Aaron, and we'll come back next week with a new exciting episode and career advice. We got you covered. We'll see you next time.